and when people are stuck in a state of sustained pain, it becomes very difficult to, I think, see outside of that. And I think it's easy to get trapped in trying to deal with it yourself. I know in my own experience, with it, I had a really, really dark season in 2011 to 2013 when I had a business partnership that fell apart, and my entire identity had revolved around that partnership. And then the carnage that came after that when I was scrambling to try and fix it. And it's like, it's like when you get behind, when if you're in the casino, you get behind the house. I mean, we could do it more in one session if we needed to. I mean, I've got to leave at 4 to pick up my daughter.
Yeah, I'm just recording now because we can just mark our way into whatever, because I think this is a natural way to talk about a pretty heavy subject. Like what exactly can you cover in the space of 45 minutes, 2 hours, let alone a lifetime, to talk about some of these heavier subjects, because life is so complicated, confusing, and all of us want certainty. We want the same things. We want to feel valued. We want to feel contentment, satisfaction. We want to feel loved. Everybody wants to feel loved. And, that's why so many of us try and force things to happen, because we're like, if I can, well, first off, nobody else is going to do it. So I'm got to be the one to do it. And if I work hard enough, if I apply myself well, if I am constantly leaning on my own ability to make myself happy, then I can do it. Because I think a lot of people are being lied to. They hear that they are enough, and by that I don't mean that they are not good enough. It's just that they think they can do everything to lead to happiness and all of the things that they're chasing. And we've talked about it numerous times, where the material things that we chase, the relational status, all of the kinds of things that we believe are going to make us happy will end up failing you. Now, a relationship can make you happy. Good money can make your life easier. But again, I think people, including myself, have been caught up in this lie around contentment and fulfillment, and it's why I at one point found myself with Smith & Wesson MMP 2.0 pointed at my temple, because I was just like, nothing that I'm doing is working, and I hate living. Like, I don't want to live one more day, and I thought the easiest way for me to stop feeling that was to kill myself. So yeah. I think we can talk about that for sure, because it is not a unique situation to find oneself in, especially now.
Yeah, and to give everybody a little bit more context, as we've been leading up to today's episode, one of the things that we were talking about is, the number of people that, we've seen lately in our news feeds that, have taken their own lives, or it's very questionable as whether that's something that they've done or not. The level of, divorce that's happening. I mean, it was, the percentage on that was already high, but it seems to be, it is getting higher. Mm-hmm. Business partnerships falling apart, relationships falling apart, people having much shorter fuses, out on the road, in all sorts of situations, and it's just something that we were discussing, and there's just a lot of pain out there right now, and for good reason, and I think and when people are stuck in a state of sustained pain, it becomes very difficult to, I think, see outside of that. And I think it's easy to get trapped in trying to deal with it yourself. I know in my own experience, with it, I had a really, really dark season in 2011 to 2013 when I had a business partnership that fell apart, and my entire identity had revolved around that partnership. And then the carnage that came after that when I was scrambling to try and fix it. And it's like, it's like when you get behind, when if you're, in the casino, you get behind the house, it's hard to get back out in front again.
Yeah.
And I was doing everything I could to do that, and very, fortunately I did not ruin my marriage during that process, but there was a point where my wife like actually gave me an ultimatum that I had to, choose between her and the girls, and the mission that I was on at that particular point in time. And what I'm thankful that she did that. She let me know before things got too far gone. But I mean, when I was in the amidst that season, like I never sat anywhere like with a gun or anything like that to my head. But I vividly remember driving into the office every single day, and actually, like asking God, like, having the conversation with God. It's like, maybe it's better if my kids are gonna be better off, if they're gonna be better off without me, because like because I was creating a lot of emotional pain in the house. Like I wasn't drunk and breaking things, and I was never physically abusive with my wife. And I wasn't even really that verbally abusive. It was more about what I wasn't doing and what I wasn't saying, and me not being physically present, and like, sleeping 2 to 3 hours, which was definitely was making me where I definitely was not as kind and as attentive as I needed to be, nowhere near it. But amidst all of that, like, my conversation, daily drive at that office, or just the thought I had was like, man, it's just be better if an 18-wheeler came across the highway, took me out. Like my family would be better, my wife be better.
Yeah.
Like that's where I'm at. And I think that's where a lot of people get, where they turn inward. And I mentioned this to you as well. Like I wouldn't say that I was judgmental. When I was younger, I think I was definitely judgmental of people that committed suicide. I was like, what? How could it be that bad? Like, and obviously I was very naive. I had not lived enough life yet to realize what that weight can actually feel like when you're truly trying to carry it on your own. And I did get a chance to get a very different viewpoint of it when I got, the opportunity to be a part of a psychedelic, therapeutic session down in Mexico with a bunch of special operators through a pretty fantastic program. And I remember how, so like, there's everyone meets beforehand, before traveling down to Mexico, and you kind of meet to get familiar with everybody. But I just remember how heavy everybody felt, and like as I listened to people talk over that weekend about the things that they were struggling with and the weight, and and obviously it's this experience is very different. Well, there's probably things about that are very similar and things are very different, but as it related to like that very specific type of human being, I kind of had been very, just intrigued as why would somebody that had these people had such amazing careers, because the suicide rate in the military is very high. And it's like, what is it that, like I get survival's guilt, I get like a lot of those things. But there was still a piece where I was like, man, I don't fully understand like why that was the end result. And as I got to listen and learn from these individuals over the course of like that, 3+ days, a lot of them, I mean, they're protectors. Like, and I would say a lot of people have that in them, where they really do seek to protect those around them, and especially these individuals, this warrior class of human being. And as I listened to them talk, and they talked more and more about how they had become the problem, and like, they were a burden, and there's all these things that they were doing, and like, so they had spent this entire career with very clear on who the enemy was and what they were doing and why they were doing it. And, all of the things that like gave them purpose. And then when that season was over, for whatever reason, then they weren't actively doing that anymore. And they started dealing with, the aftermath, like the brain damage from, exposure to so many explosions, sleep deprivation, survivor's guilt, seeing, friends and people that they cared and loved about, blown up, like just, and, dying in the service of, of serving our country. And, they're wired to protect. Like they were clearly on this mission, protecting others. And then when they got back and all of these things kind of started unraveling, and, when in their minds, they became the problem. And like they taking, basically all of their hardwiring and training to protect others from a threat, it became protecting others from themselves. And that was kind of like a piece that it gave me a new understanding of, what that must be like. Just heavy stuff. Like, I mean, and I don't think you have to be in the military to land, like in that category of, feeling like you're a burden, feeling like your mistakes, you can't overcome them. Being,
I think what you hit on,
like
what you hit on there is purpose. So everybody is looking for purpose. If you look at the number 2 best-selling book in the world for like the past 20 years, it's The Purpose-Driven Life, which is written by a pastor, Rick Warren. So right behind the Bible is that book, The Purpose-Driven Life, because everybody is looking for purpose. And it's very easy for you to find that you're not living up to your believed purpose. Like you think, oh, I'm supposed to be here to do this, that, or the other. Or on the flip side, not having a purpose. Wandering through life aimlessly, wondering why the heck you're even here, feeling like you're being ignored, like people are passing right by you as if you don't matter. And so, again, very easy to press the eject button if you feel like you don't matter or you're not contributing in any meaningful way. And that's where I ended up. Like, I think I was 29. Yeah, I was 29 when I was just like, I don't want to be here anymore. I was a drug addict. I spent the past 10 years of my life living for myself, and I had nothing to show for what I knew to be like some innate talents that I had and some convictions I had about who I was meant to be. And like, I feel like I was squandering it. And so I was just like, I should just kill myself because the world will be better off without me here. I'm not doing much other than taking up space and breathing up everybody else's oxygen. And so, I think that's what happens. Like, it's probably what's happening with some of the things that we're seeing here in our newsfeed. People are like, they feel like they have no purpose or there is no reason to continue on living because this world is doomed, right? And so if they did have a purpose, then why even bother continuing to live for another year or another 10 with this perceived notion that the world around us is crashing and it's going to just be a terrible time to live, so they just want out. And I think that's like the same thing with a marriage that fails. People go into it thinking that the purpose of marriage is to be happy. And then they find, oh, I'm not any happier in this marriage. In fact, I'm actually a lot unhappier than I had been because, you've got the honeymoon phase and everything like that. And then you have two imperfect people living for their own happiness. They didn't actually live to become holy. They didn't live to become better versions of themselves for the other person they committed to. They said instead, like, I'm going to exchange these vows and we're going to both get happy together without actually putting in the kind of work that leads to ever like long-lasting happiness. And so they're just like, eject. And that's why you have serial divorces. Like, one person who is divorced is likely to divorce at a higher rate than somebody who never divorces because they've already done it. They've seen how easy it is to get out. And maybe it's not the easiest thing in the world, but like you said, purpose. Like, it's just as easy for somebody who had served in elite units of the U.S. military to find themselves wanting to eat a bullet because they've lost that sense of purpose or it's been warped, as it is for somebody who lives out in whatever town, anywhere middle America, who's just like, my life sucks. And they want to do the exact same thing.
Yeah, or the person who's had a lot of success, in a very specific role, like let's just say business, and their identity's gotten wrapped up in it. They've spent years and years, building their career, building their reputation. And I think when, a lot of relationships get built around that, and when something like that, unravels and falls apart, like it's, that is a tough thing to go through. Relationships ending, extremely tough. Like that's, and if you're already going through a really, really dark season personally, And then on top of that, a relationship then also, disintegrates, and you don't have that person to depend on in the way you did in the past. Like that's, man, that makes that situation, it enhances, the experience that you're going to have. That's for sure.
Yeah. One thing that's kind of true for a lot of these situations is that ultimately, like, people are responsible for how they end up there. Not in every circumstance, but I think in a lot of circumstances, people are responsible for ending up at a place where they're ready to press that quote unquote easy button and just leave, like whether it's a marriage or just life in general. I think part of that comes down to conversations that they're having internally or what they're consuming. And I don't mean that is strictly in a dietary sense, but that actually could contribute to it. It's unlikely that that's a major contributing factor, but like, what else are they consuming? What are they believing is true and then consuming that actively? I know that we see this with what's happened with the younger generation who is constantly on social media, but people who are our age, 30s, 40s, 50s even, they're not immune to it either. They're always living through the lens of like, if I had what that other person has, my life would be better. And if they find that they can't achieve it or their best effort has them falling short, then of course, like, that conversation that they focus internally is like, I'm not good enough. And you can continue that conversation on an open loop, and all of a sudden you believe it. And so it's, again, easy for you to make the justification that, like, I'm going to leave. Like, I don't need to live another instant because I'm not good enough. Nobody cares, blah, 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 blah. Like, that's really what it is. It's blah, blah, blah. It's nonsense, but people repeat it to themselves so many times that they end up believing it's true. That was for sure partly true for what I went through. There was also another component, and this is kind of what you spoke to with your health journey, which I think is really important. I had no idea that there is a genetic mutation that about 50% of people, especially in the Western world, suffer from, called MTHFR. So there's a couple different ways that this mutation can manifest, and I will not be able to do well other than to say that my father, who's a physician, was like, hey, I really want you to get tested when I was going through these depressive episodes and a lot of anxiety. He's like, I want you to get tested for MTHFR because if it is true that if you suffer from this particular genetic mutation, then you're not able to process the essential nutrients that are coming into your body, turn them into their end stage forms, and use them. And specifically, there was folic acid or folate and methylcobalamin, which is vitamin B12, that my body was not able to process upon learning that I did have MTHFR. And part of the reason that that's such a big deal is like those vitamins or the other nutrients that are created through this methylation cycle are really important for neural function, for being able to release the right neurotransmitters and having like the whole cascade of hormones that are produced in your body produced at the appropriate rate. So like I was depressed and anxious not only because I was having conversations that were untrue, but my body was running in an untrue fashion. Like it wasn't operating at its peak capabilities. And so like I had two of those things working together against me. And so, I started turning my life towards faith and saying like, look, like the purpose that I have is to be loved by God and to love God. And then I started taking supplements that were able to correct that MTHFR. I've been on them ever since. And I've like literally had a couple days in the past 10 years where I've thought this, not even close to the same kinds of thoughts where I'm like, I'm going to kill myself. I've had the thoughts of like, if the car crashed right now, it wouldn't be the biggest deal in the world, even though I can quickly dismiss and rebuke those thoughts because I know what that is. Like that conversation doesn't come from a healthy place. It probably comes from the enemy. And also like maybe I forgot the supplements like for 2 or 3 days in a row, and all of a sudden my body is acting in this way. So I think I was saying that people put themselves there many times. I don't think that that's always the case. I think if you have some kind of health deficit that is causing you to have these kinds of conversations, or just in general like not helping you produce the right number of neurotransmitters, hormones, and all those kinds of things, you may end up there by happenstance, which really sucks. But that's, again, like there's two outs. Like you can have better conversations and you can fix your body.
No, well, I definitely there's enough evidence out there of from the standpoint of what is going into our bodies, what our bodies are being subjected to as far as like the things in our environment. It could be mold, it could be, you know, sound waves, it can be Wi-Fi, it can be, you know, vegetable oils, it can be, I mean, there's so much stuff that's happening right now that those things can definitely play a massive role. Because I mean, like if you've got a ton of inflammation in your body and your hormones are out of whack, like, because a lot of like that's a lot of, you know, like for people who have PTSD or they have brain injuries, like a lot of what's going on is like they're you know, their body is no longer, you know, regulating their hormones in the way that enables them to function appropriately. And in many cases, you know, testosterone for guys, testosterone levels can start to, you know, dropping, you know, like to scary levels at a very young age. There's all sorts of stuff. So I definitely think that for sure plays a role into it. And then there was something else that you said that I think is worth hitting on again, is that I think, you know, we live in a culture now where, you know, it's acceptable and I don't know if I'd say expected, but like, you know, we're manufacturing like victims.
Yeah.
And people are being encouraged to think that way when in reality, like, so I go back to the situation, you know, that I was in, you know, in 2011, 2013, like there were some things that happened that were definitely, I would say, outside sources, you know, had influence, and there were things that happened that were outside of my control. But even those things, like I had made the decisions that had led to ultimately being in a situation where those things could happen. And I think it's very important for people to recognize that, like, while it might not feel good to say, well, yeah, like I own this, like, you know, like I made all the decisions and the choices that led up to this moment that was really unfortunate and frustrating and created pain for other people. But like, there's also a lot of power in that, because if I made all those choices that led there to that moment, I can make different choices.
Yeah.
That can lead to a different moment that has the outcome that I've been working towards. And so all of that information is like anything that's happening, it's not even good or bad. It's just what's based on what I'm trying to do in life and what I'm trying to do for my family or with my family. I do have power over that. Like, you know, I have the ability to make decisions and choose and ultimately, you know, arrive at a destination, you know, that I'd like to say that's of my choosing. At the end of the day, I believe that, you know, like that God is in control, and no matter what happens, like the victory is secured. And like, I believe that Jesus died on the cross for my sins, and that, you know, I will spend eternity in heaven. So there's that gives me a different perspective on life. And I even had that perspective back then. I just was in so much pain that, like, you know, I thought maybe God was mad at me, or, you know, had, you know, like that I'd done something, you know, that was deserving of, you know, what was happening, which, you know, I've learned since then that obviously none of those things are actually accurate. If anything, it's actually the opposite. But again, going back to that, like taking ownership of your situation. I think that's the first step, is if when someone really gets into like a spot like that, it's like, you know, either having somebody in your life that can like really help you objectively see those things and speak truth to you. I think, you know, having somebody like that is extremely helpful if you're willing to listen to them. And I think that can be tough. I think it can be really hard. I think when you're in a really bad place, it's, you know, it's challenging to reach out and ask for help. Sometimes you're almost not even capable of it. You're carrying so much shame and frustration and anger and resentment, and, you know, and especially if you're in that more of that victim's mentality, like it can be really, really tough.
Yeah.
And I would say this is as much for the people who, if you're not in that place, if you have someone in your life that is in that place, like, and you recognize somebody that you think they may be struggling, if you have the ability to, and if you have the relationship to press there, like I would definitely press. I mean, you never know when you yourself are going to be in that situation, and it could just be one conversation from one person to help pull you out of, like, you know, a bad spot, or at least help you see things differently. But that's, there was somebody, I'm not going to obviously mention specific names, but there was someone that we lost in our community recently, and it's haunted me. Like, I knew that there was a lot of stuff going on there, and I was actively reaching out, and and the conversation kind of kept getting kicked down the road. It's like, oh, they were busy, which I knew they were busy because they were kind of dealing with a lot. But I could have pressed harder. Like, I could have, like, and not to say, and I'm not so arrogant to think that, like, oh, if I'd had a chance to talk to him, like, it would have made any difference.
Sure.
I believe, God's the one who really would have, if God's the one who would have intervened in that situation. But it just, after the fact, knowing how, like, clearly that individual was in a lot of pain. I just, I wish that I'd have pushed harder. I wish I'd have fought harder. Like, I knew that there was something going on. And like I said, like, I did reach out, and I reached out repeatedly, like, I was pressing, but, like, I could have done more than I did, to try and really, champion for that person, and just to try and get him on the phone to talk to him, or go and physically be present. I mean, that's a situation where I would have had to jump on a plane, but it would have been worth it. Like, if that person was still here. And this person was somebody that I would have never, if it really did go down like that, like, I would have never even suspected that. Like, I wouldn't have thought that that was actually a possibility.
Yeah.
You just never know.
I know for sure that a lot of times especially when it comes as a shock like that, the way they present is a facade, because ultimately what this comes down to is an issue of pride. And this is obviously going to be a theological statement, but pride is what makes somebody feel like that they have the authority over their own life to take it out of existence, right? Like, they know better than the person or the God who created them. So, like, that is it's a crazy thing to say. It's like, that's a prideful thing to do, but that's exactly what it is. And I think that what happens there a lot of the times is, like, people, again, fundamentally don't know why they're here. So they could have everything. They could have the wife, they could have the car, they could have the house, they could have the wealth, they could have everything that they ever needed, and it's not enough because, like, they don't have an understanding of what they were created for in the first place. And that's a really easy question to answer when you have a belief system, especially one that is based in the faith system that we share in Christianity. It's just like, you're meant to love God and enjoy him. Like, that's pretty much it. And it's a hard thing to wrap your head around, that, like, that it could be so simple. It's like those two things, loving God and enjoying him. Now, loving God can be played out in two different ways. Like, you can actually love God, you can follow his commandments, and then you can love his children. That's what he instructs us to do. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your might. And then love your neighbor as yourself. So the second part is really important when you're looking laterally. Like, how does that actually apply itself in the world that I live in? And again, so pride saying, I know what's best for me and the people around me, and then removing yourself is actually a terrible thing to do, because you're failing at your original purpose, which is to love people around you. And I get it. People are just like, they think of themselves as a burden, and yet it's pride that warped their understanding of why they were even put on this earth in the first place. Like, they think that they're failing in the sense that, like, they're not happy. Well, they're not happy because they didn't know their purpose. Yeah. And that's why for me it was easy. Like, once I was able to make that transformation along with, like, the health improvements, I was just like, oh my gosh, like, I actually don't exist for me. I exist for the people around me. And every time, literally every single time that, like, I end up in a place where I am frustrated, anxious, depressed, like, I don't even get depressed anymore. I get anxious, like, in the day-to-day. It's usually because all of a sudden, like, I'm looking at me and my happiness first, and then that's where, like, viewing outwardly, like, I can't imagine, like, why things are going as bad as they are. But then you realize, and I had this realization this week in church. I was just like, with what we're going through in the company, sometimes I'm like, I'm so bent out of shape about building my company or our company in this place. But you know what I mean? It's like my company.
No, I know what you mean.
I'm like, it's not even mine. Like, it's God's company. why do I care? Like,
Yeah.
I should be focused on, like, it's his company, and like I have the benefit of being able to work and partner with him in building this. And the reason that we've done this, like we've talked about on this podcast, is that why is like it's meant to affect other people positively, including the people who work for us, and then the people that we care for provisionally as fathers and as patriarchs. I'm going to use that word just to tick some people off, but yeah, as patriarchs, I'm like, okay, if I get back to that, then that conversation is like, one, I can't take myself out of the equation. If I ever got to a place where I was depressed enough to want to commit suicide, it's like, well, I know my purpose. My purpose is to make sure I can elevate the lives of other people. And so that's why you show up and fight. And I think that's probably what happens for, I don't know this individual. You probably don't know exactly what was going on in his mind, but I could hazard a guess that it was one of those inwardly focused types of motivations, if that is indeed what happened. But we can at least say, like, for hundreds, if not thousands, if not millions of other people who do commit suicide, inwardly focused. And
no, I think, again, it's like, I think we get very attached to how we want things to be, and very attached to how things are, and when those things, especially when there's been years and years of intentional effort and whether they want to call it work or time spent into building something like that, especially like ourselves, like it's really, really, really challenging when that fades away, or when that if that goes away. And I think having a foundation, like our faith, in Christianity, and, trusting and believing that we do have a purpose that we're here for, and that we're here to be a part of building the kingdom. When that's what you're doing, and that's what you truly do believe it, when you are living that out, when something falls apart, it gives you an ability to, I think, have a more objective, look at it, where you can recognize when sometimes things have to fall apart for them to come together.
Sure.
And, and sometimes we can go off in these directions that, may not actually are in our best interest. But it's very, very hard to recognize that at times. I've definitely been in very, very toxic situations, before, where I stayed in it for really, really long periods of time because of like my own, kind of commitment, my own ego, pride for sure, of not wanting to give up, or not wanting to there to be this perceived failure. When in reality when the reality was by removing myself from it and not, allowing myself to continue to participate in what was not a good situation, was way more damaging, but I was so locked up in it that my ego just couldn't let go of like what was, kind of what was being built and what had been built for. And, it's tough. It's tough. Those can be very tricky situations to navigate. So I do get it when people get really bogged down in that. And then usually when those types of situations happen, like, you're not taking as good a care of yourself. You're drinking alcohol, good chance. Like, you're not sleeping enough. Like, in my situation, I had been prescribed Adderall and Vyvanse, and like, I had no clue like how much that was messing me up. I'm like frying my dopamine receptors, and like, my body's, all the things that my body would naturally do to create energy, and it was masking other problems that I had, like that were actually, truly going on in the background that I wasn't aware of, that made that situation a lot worse, where it made my, my mental health, like, a challenge. Cause like, it was just, my brain was not operating the way that it was supposed to. So I think, it's like this snowball effect of, when these things start to happen, it's like, there's a lot of other things that then start, cascading and happening as well. And, it's where, again, it's like you can find yourself in a really, really lonely place really fast. So if you're out there and you're listening to this, and like, you are in one of those places, like, I would just encourage you to take a chance and talk to somebody, talk to anybody that you know, anybody that like is in your life that we're like, you know, that they'll listen to you. I really encourage you to take that risk and just, I think they'll surprise you. I think there'll be somebody there that's there to support you. And, you know, and be willing to roll up the sleeves and just be in it with you. I know it's messy. I know that I just know that, I mean, that it's such a dark place. Like when you get to that spot where it's like, you just, you know, you feel like you're such a burden to everybody around you. You don't feel like anything that you do, works out. Like you feel like every move you're making is not the right move. You second guess everything. And then behind all of that, most times, like it's coming from a place where you don't want to be a burden. Just know that you're not. The people in your life want you to succeed. They want to be a part of that. So yeah, I would definitely challenge anyone out there to take that risk. And if you don't have anybody to talk to, there are services out there too. Like 988 is one of those. You can call 988, and that's a hotline where there's people that are there ready to talk to you if you don't have anybody. But just don't swallow it. Don't fight that battle on your own. And if you also like know that there is someone that does love you, his name's Jesus, and he can carry all those burdens, which might sound crazy.
Yeah, I would say it sounds crazy on its face, but I mean, you got two people talking about it right now who have experienced that healing power. There's millions of people who have benefited from having a relationship with Jesus. And, you know, I just want to clarify a lot of the things that I have said earlier around pride and purpose. Like those aren't call outs of judgment. It's just an explanation of how so many people end up there. And again, like I know because I was in a place like that. I mean, I had every reason in the world to kill myself. Like we can get into this another time, but like I had 2 or 3 things happen over the series of 24 hours that I said, if this happens, and it shouldn't have happened, like it would have been totally random, then I'm going to kill myself. Happens. Like I had all the signals. So it's just like, you know, and yet God stayed my hand and I was able to not pull the trigger, like literally or figuratively, whatever the one is. And I mean, that's the thing is there's hope. And that's why this podcast exists. It's not just like, let's get back to fundamentals as a nation and get us back on the right track. But like, what are the fundamentals that allow for a healthy and thriving life? And ultimately they come down to who got you here in the first place, and that's Jesus. And it's such an easy prayer too. Like that's probably one of the easiest places to start if you don't have anybody to talk to. It's just like, just cry out to God. He says in 1 Peter, don't I know the exact verse, but it's like he says to cast all of your cares on him because he cares. And that was a lifeline for me. And it still is a lifeline for a lot of people I know presently who struggle. They're just like, I don't have it within me to care enough to continue on. And the God of the universe, again, like we talked about this a few weeks ago, like about how small our view of God is. Like the universe is 98 billion light years across right now. And there is one God who made the whole thing. And sure, you can argue that he didn't, or you could argue that he did. You're here. That's the one thing that is true. So...
Yeah, it's funny, man. Every single time, and I've had a good number of these moments, you know, with being, you know, an entrepreneur since about 2005, where I've had those moments where I sat there and I was like, I don't know if this can get any worse. And the reality is it could have gotten way worse than it did. My wife I still have my wife. She's healthy. I have my kids. They're healthy. Like I've got my health again. Where, you know, and I was, you know, got pretty sick in, you know, 2020, 2021. But in that situation where I got really sick, and in the previous situation where like, you know, all these things that like I thought identified me and was, you know, without those things, like who was I? Like in every single one of those situations, like I did cry out and I did ask and I got quiet and I just stopped invoking and it wasn't like it was like I consciously did it. I just got to a place where I was so beat down that I was like, okay, what I'm doing is not working. I'm just going to not get quiet in the sense of like not praying, not talking, but like I stopped at forcing my will. Like I stopped trying to invoke all the things that I thought needed to happen. And I got quiet and I got still. And it was amazing to see what happened when God started acting on my behalf. And like, I ended up being in situations that were, I couldn't have dreamed up that, like, as far as how things improved. And it just took, me letting go of the wheel and letting God like actually truly direct the steps, in the path. And it was probably one of the hardest things I've done in my life. And I still struggle with it daily.
Yeah. Yeah. I know that so many people who are in these really dark places they're just saying this: if this happens, then I'd be happy. There's this expectation that these moving targets that we create for ourselves are going to be what finally offers fulfillment and contentment and satisfaction and ultimately happiness. That's what we're all seeking. And they find, especially like in the case of people who achieve success in business, it's like, boom, they hit that target. And then all of a sudden they're no happier. And they may even be less happy than they had been prior to that. And then they achieve the next milestone and then the next one. And every single time they check that box, they're like, why? Why hasn't anything improved for me? It's because you weren't made for achieving material success. You were made for something much more than that. And I think about that often, like how much we've improved as a company in 6 years. Like we've gone 1,000% growth. That's very uncommon for small businesses to achieve. And I would expect that we will have 10,000x. But I have to understand that if we achieved any level of increased success, like that's not what makes me happy. It's the reason that I'm here and being called to that purpose of loving God that is what can give me happiness, because like that's the only thing that is not going to change. And I just pray, really pray, like that people who may hear this would understand that like it is nothing that you can achieve on your own that is going to lead to your happiness and your satisfaction. And if you ever are in a dark place, like the answer is right there. Like he says that if you cast your cares on him, he will care. Like, and he's right there with you at any time. Sounds crazy, but I know it's true. I don't want to doubt about that at all.
Yeah, no, I amen. Well, man, what do you think about actually closing us out like in prayer today?
Yeah. Not opposed to that at all. Maybe we can start doing that on a lot more of these solos. Yeah, I'll go ahead and do it. Do I have to pray with my eyes closed on a podcast? With every head bowed and every hand folded. No, I'll go ahead and I'll close my eyes. That'll be kind of weird for all of you people listening. You don't have to worry about seeing my face, but if you're on the YouTube, you're gonna watch me close my eyes. So I'll go ahead and do it. Father God, I just thank you so much that not only do you hear us, but that you respond in the ways that we need for your purposes. So I just pray that anybody that is listening to this podcast right now would understand that you love them, especially if they're going through a hard time where they feel like there is nothing good going on in their lives. I pray that you would minister to them, that your spirit would invite them into a relationship with you that is going to give them something that they can't find here on this earth, which is the presence and the satisfaction of knowing you and loving you. I just pray that people would be bold enough to reach out when they're in a time of hurt and in a time of need, that they would be able to find the answers that they're looking for in your word, as well as in the new relationship that they can form with you. I pray that they understand that there is a God and that he loves them and that he died on a cross for them and that he invites them into a relationship with him forever. So I just pray that in your name, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Yeah. That I've never heard a podcast end in prayer, so we did it.
There it is.
Oh, world's first. Probably not.
Man. I'm sure somebody else has done it, but felt appropriate.
Yeah. All right. Bye. Oh yeah. Well, actually, we haven't pressed stop record yet. So if you want to follow us, don't forget to subscribe on whichever platform you're listening to. Please like us, give us a review if you like that. You may have hated that, so feel free to leave a review if you hated it as well. It doesn't really matter. The algorithm likes the engagement, and we're all about stroking the algorithm. And of course, make sure to follow us. You can find us at patreononpurpose.com or YouTube, Instagram, Facebook. I think we're on TikTok. I don't know if we've given the Chinese a healthy dose of truth lately, so we'll have to check on if we're on TikTok. And again, thanks for listening.